Thank you so much for joining us for Leading and Learning, the Denver Foundation's event series for fundholders. I'm Javier Alberto Soto, President and CEO of the Denver Foundation, and I'm delighted that you're here with us today for a deep dive on economic opportunity, one of the primary areas of focus under our new strategic framework. We've got some incredible guests today and are looking forward to a dynamic, informative, and thought-provoking conversation. So to kick us off, I'm going to turn it to our Chief Impact Officer, Dace West, who will serve as moderator. Again, my deep thanks for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome or welcome back if you've been joining us for this whole Leading and Learning series. We're really happy to see you here today. I'm going to take you through a few quick logistics and then we'll get into our program. So as you saw when you came on, the session's being recorded. If you'd like to use closed captioning or subtitles, please click the button on the bottom right-hand corner of your Zoom screen and select Show Subtitles. You can also select Show Full Transcript if that's something that you'd prefer. All of you will be muted for the presentation, but we would love to have you submit your questions in the Q&A feature. And we'll get to just as many of those questions as we can after we have a little bit of conversation with our guests in the allotted time. So getting started, as Javier mentioned, economic opportunity is one of the 5 priority funding areas that came out of the strategic plan that the Denver Foundation released last year. We're particularly focused on community wealth building and workforce development. We're really excited to be able to dig a little deeper into particularly the community wealth building topic today. We have 2 leaders with us who are incredible, and I'd ask them to come onto the screen with me so that I can introduce them. I think they're going to take us through a really thoughtful and insightful conversation, and that will all lead with a much deeper understanding of these issues. So just to quickly introduce them, I'll start with Makisha Boothe. Makisha is the founder and head business coach of SistaBiz Global Network, a business accelerator for Black women entrepreneurs. Welcome, Makisha. Happy to have you with us. And then we also have Yessica Xytlalli, Holguin, who is the co-founder and executive director of the Center for Community Wealth Building, which promotes strategies for a sustainable economy and works to transform the current economic development system. Welcome, Yessica. So happy to see you here today. So Yessica, I'm just gonna hop right in and start off with a question for you, which is really fundamental to our conversation today, and that is, can you talk about exactly what community wealth building means? What is that? How do we define it? Just give us a little bit of a platform that we can jump off of for our discussion.
Absolutely, thank you. Center for Community Wealth Building itself has become a buzzword. And today, in honor of Cesar Chavez Day, I would like to conceptualize it in one of his quotes. He said, "We cannot seek achievement for ourselves and forget about the progress and prosperity of our community." And that's in essence what we're doing with community wealth building. We define community wealth building as a set of strategies that begin to shift our economic paradigm. These are strategies that lift whole communities, both economically and socially. We think about community wealth building strategies as strategies that help create quality jobs, strengthen our economic opportunities, and truly create a pathway for economic mobility and economic prosperity in our communities. But it also, I want to point out that it goes beyond economic outcomes. Yes, we want people to have higher wages, we want people to have more economic stability, but we cannot forget about the concepts that community wealth building and that our communities bring to our well-being. And so we also think about community wealth building as creating and maintaining the sense of community and truly the fabric of our communities that have contributed to our own well-being. And so we think about a neighborhood and communities, the talents and skills of our communities, our health, arts, nature, and culture that create opportunities for our people to create, to contribute to the well-being and the common good.
I love that. It's such a holistic view and really brings kind of every part of a person and part of a community together. Makisha, can I turn to you? We know that Black households own nearly 90% less wealth than median white household income, and that gap is even larger for single Black women relative to single white men. talk to us about the need for community wealth building in the community that you serve in particular.
Yeah, no matter how many times I hear that statistic, it never fails to break my heart. And it's also the reason I wake up and do what I do every day. But to answer your question, the wealth gap really perpetuates all the other racial disparities that we face. So you look at health disparity, you look at opportunity gaps in education, you look at recidivism rates, et cetera. When we look for pathways out of these wicked problems at the family level, the wealth gap is a key lever. It's key. The wealth gap is a key barrier. Addressing it is a key lever. So, you know, by addressing it, we can increase the Black families' access to capital and home ownership. We can begin to reverse generational poverty, but all of the other racial disparities I mentioned. So community wealth building is key because it's about ownership and empowerment at the community level, as Yessica said. It's more sustainable and scalable than individual wealth journey. And so it can accelerate the process of eliminating the wealth gaps that are in the other disparities that are impacting the entire community. So I think what makes community wealth building super important is the collective impact that it has to accelerate our way out of these disparities.
Can you talk about why you think it's important to reduce the earning gap for Black women in particular?
Yeah, and I also just want to quickly mention on the other question, the Black community's ownership and circulation of the Black dollar is the lowest of any race. Our dollar circulates 1 time in the African American community, 6 times in the Latino community, and 9 times in the Asian community. This is one of the key reasons why we have no access to friends and family dollars, why we have no lenders within our community who will take risks on us at early stages of business and early stages of financial development in our lives. So we often can't make critical first moves to achieve financial stability or generate wealth. But as far as, you know, the earning gap for Black women, we make 60 cents on the dollar. We're more likely to be the breadwinners in our households. We're the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in the country, but the lowest earning. And the reason why we're the fastest group is not because we think it's great and wonderful to be entrepreneurs. Some of us do, but largely because the numbers look the way they do and the rate is so great because of our need for entrepreneurship to close that earning gap, to close the pay equity gap, and to put food on the table. And so if we want to address the wealth gap that we just discussed and all the disparities that we're raising right now, the Black woman's success and her wealth journey is a key lever.
Yessica, you were drawing out this concept of community assets a little bit earlier. And can you talk in some more detail about the assets that our communities have to be able to build community wealth?
Absolutely. And Dace, for me, this approach is critical and it's very personal too. I grew up in a very low income community where so many entities would come to us and they were very quick to point out what we needed without recognizing all of the beautiful strengths and assets that the community had. And so when we think about community wealth building, we cannot start from a place of deficit. We have to start with what we already have and continue to move forward. So for our communities, we have, while the needs are great and we cannot discount those, we have amazing residents, amazing people who are willing to say, I need to take that next step. So for us, it's about looking at the power, the collective power that our communities have and the assets that our communities have, which include hospitals, universities, municipalities. We have these entities, large institutions, even faith-based congregations that have an economic power and actually have the ability to change the economic paradigm for a lot of our local communities. And so I'm really excited to be having this conversation because I truly believe that asset-based community development really is critical to our development to ensure that we're not continuing to perpetuate the charity models of, continuing to feed. Yes, those are needed. And yet we also need to look at addressing the root cause of the problem through an asset-based approach.
Great. We get into some of the nitty gritty, talk a little bit about how your organization works to build community wealth. Tell us what that process looks like and the kinds of things that you do.
Absolutely. I can talk about community wealth building all day. So if I go too long, please send me a message. So for us, community wealth building, we started with the idea of how do we increase economic opportunity for people? And so we embarked on a 1-year journey to listen to individuals, communities, organizations, and identify where those gaps were. And we identified several gaps, but the biggest ones were in democratizing ownership. We truly believe in employee ownership as a model. We truly believe in cooperatives. When people have agency over their jobs, when people have ownership, something changes. And so we definitely believe in increasing employee ownership. We are doing a lot of work to educate communities, businesses, to ensure that this is a viable model. I will say that back in 2017, people were like, but that doesn't really work. That's idealistic. Now we know that it works. And there's even an office at the state level working to ensure that employee ownership is part of just the way that we do things. We also believe in increasing opportunities for entrepreneurs, specifically for entrepreneurs of color who haven't necessarily been seen as, whose voices haven't been elevated, and they haven't been necessarily represented by the chambers of commerce. These are the 1 to 10 employee businesses that are very community driven and have not necessarily had their voice elevated. And the way that we support worker-owned enterprises and small businesses is truly by connecting them to new markets. And so our third strategy is our anchor institution engagement. We work with hospitals, universities, municipalities, cultural institutions, faith-based congregations to look at how they use their economic engine to support local economies. And so we are doing a lot of our approaches at the grassroots level. We work directly with entrepreneurs. We work directly with community members. Some of our work also includes community organizing, because we recognize that in essence, we're building the market for cooperatives. We're building the market for employee ownership. But a lot of our work is at the ecosystem level. We know that we cannot do everything ourselves, nor do we want to. We want to be able to partner with those who are already doing the work and be able to shift so that we can create a more cohesive ecosystem for our entrepreneurs. But ultimately, our work is at the systems level. We're working to ensure that hospitals, universities actually have embedded in their policies the opportunity, so that it's not that they're using a local business out of the kindness of their heart, but rather that it's embedded into the achievements and the outcomes of these institutions. We're really excited to do this because we know that's where the significant gap is right now. And so I'll share one quick example. In 2020 and 2021, a lot of our institutions said, great, we're ready to support businesses owned by people of color, and yet we don't have an easy place where we can go and find all of the caterers that are in our communities. We know that we don't have all of the janitorial companies or engineering. And so I went to many organizations. I was like, is that something that you can do? Is that something that you can do? Finally, we ended up coming together to develop shopbypoc.com. It is a place-based, an online marketplace that will, in essence, bring the supply and the demand together. Because at the same time, what we're hearing from businesses is that, as much as we want to do business with the university, they don't know about us, and we don't even know the point of entry. And so what's really exciting is that while we're working with the entrepreneurs, we're also working with the place-based institutions to help them assess the barriers to entry and help them recognize that sometimes the policies that they've had for 10, 15 years need to change so that they can actually have more local businesses supporting the needs of the institution.
That's great. I know that from our perspective, we've had a number of donors approach us and ask us, does a list like what you're describing exist? So that's going to be incredibly useful, both for those institutions and for individuals who are looking to change the way that they use their own individual wealth. Makisha, I'd love to throw it your way and ask you the same question. Talk a little bit about the detail of how you go about building community wealth and what that looks like from your vantage point.
Sure. So just high level, Sister Biz is really, we target Black women entrepreneurs to help them grow scalable, sellable businesses. But we do that through free coaching, training, technical assistance, and access to capital, but most importantly, through community building. And so we bring Black women together in a distributed leadership model where they lead and facilitate collaborative work groups, planning groups, and projects so that they can build wealth together and grow their businesses together. And the focus is for our solopreneurs and our very small micro businesses to shift from things like B2C to B2B models via government contracts, or our retailers maybe through wholesale contracts or landing near products in stores with retailers via expansion by moving from, home-based to physical retail locations, and via online growth through e-commerce strategies. So that's the work we're trying to do when it comes to, and something when it comes to collective or community wealth building. Something that we're really focused on is making sure that we have a double-sided model with our back office support. So we prepare taxes, we build websites, we, provide marketing services, operations, financial, QuickBooks setup, that sort of thing for our folks. But we try and we are successful at making sure that over 95% of our service providers are also Black businesses and Black women businesses and BIPOC businesses. So we have that kind of two-sided model there. And it also helps, in the cultural responsiveness, because you have someone who looks like you, who's helping you through a very sensitive topic like your cash flow projections or your P&L statement or the lack thereof. And so in terms of community wealth building, we make sure that the trainers, the coaches, and the service providers look like the women that they serve. It's community-led and it's distributed leadership throughout the community. We also are very much working on like online marketplace work with them as well, because individual websites cannot compete these days SEO-wise. And so like Yessica said with Shop BIPOC, our women are joining together to build an Amazon store page this year. We have a new sister box, a subscription model where they come together and they fulfill and put out seasonal boxes of their products. We have leads groups of service-based women who are going after contracts together and sourcing RFPs together. So that's what community wealth building is like for our entrepreneurs in our community.
In the slides that we're flipping through at the beginning of this session, there was a statistic about 20% about Black entrepreneurs being 20% less likely to access business loans through banks, and relying more on personal credit cards, family and friends, and others. I wonder if you might comment on what this tells us about the need for new economic models and what economic factors does community wealth building address that traditional models don't.
I think traditional models sustain the status quo. And so if you want to see things that are different, you've gotta make changes. And so, traditional models are anchored in policies that sustain white privilege and supremacy, systems that lock out communities of color, and community wealth building, on the other hand, gives communities of color an opportunity to create economic models that they own, that leverage their assets, that allow them to design policies and systems that are culturally responsive.
Absolutely. I'd love to have you both share a story or two about something from your work that really illustrates the need for community wealth building and its impact on individuals, on families, on communities. So maybe let's pop back over to Yessica to kick it off, and then we'll just open it up, and would love to just hear you give us kind of a flavor.
So yeah, I think what I can say is that this is really personal to me. My family members, my mother, my closest aunt, they all work for very large, big box stores, and they worked through the pandemic. And at the end of it, they ended up getting COVID-19. They ended up getting really sick, ended up losing my father as a result of it. And yet they were not the ones who were profiting from this. They received the same amount of money. They didn't necessarily receive the benefit of the risk they were taking. And so for me, community wealth building is about ensuring that those who are working to create that profit can actually benefit from that. The reality is that our current system is very extractive, as we've now seen over the last 2 years, and we felt for a very long time. And so the need for community wealth building is here, and the time is now. There's no way that we can continue to this race to the bottom without thinking that it's not going to have a massive effect on everybody. And so even if we've been able to get out of poverty, the reality is that we're going to continue to be impacted. And so for this reason, I love being able to create strategies to bring businesses and people who are working very hard to make their business work with opportunities. Because what we've seen is that they hire people from within the community. And so a couple of examples, I had the honor of getting to know an amazing woman who worked for a restaurant 15, 17 years ago. She ended up injured on the job. And as soon as she was injured and had to take time off to go to medical appointments, she was let go. And she had a lot of experience running a business. She had a lot of experience, an amazing cook. And she ended up actually, after a lot of years, ended up co-developing a worker-owned cooperative. Mujeres Emprendedoras Cooperative is a cooperative of predominantly Spanish-speaking immigrant women who are coming together to create economic opportunities, not just for themselves, but for the community as well. And they're now even looking at how do we create opportunities for housing? How do we start to address some of the issues that our communities has, utilizing the skills that we have. And so we were able to work with them to connect them to place-based institutions. One of the events that we had was at the University of Denver, where they recognized that they had so many meetings and events where they catered the meals for whatever event it was, and they recognized that so much of it was going to large corporations that were paying people minimum wage. And so we said, what if we were to come together and bring caterers, local caterers that can meet this need? And so we were able to work with the caterers, including Mujeres Emprendedoras Cooperative, to help them understand how to do business with a large institution, how to do invoicing, how to do a tax exempt order, and what they need to do on the back end to make sure that they're in compliance. At the same time, we work with the university to help them understand the barriers that these small businesses have, such as Net 30 can be really challenging for a lot of our micro enterprises. And so we were able to address some of those issues, and the university got to hear directly from these caterers. And so then it becomes about a relationship that is being built. As you and I know, this is all about relationships. This is all about social capital. And so the more that we can start to build those relationships, the more that we'll see the results. And so we had this amazing event. We had over 120 event planners from the University of Denver, and we had 11 community caterers that came together. Amazing event. And we were so afraid that the snowstorm was going to hit and we were going to have to cancel. Didn't happen. And so we're like, next time we're doing things in July. Well, 2 weeks later, the pandemic hit and everything got shut down. And while it was very difficult in that moment to get the caterers to pivot, we have seen the result of that one event now as things continue to recover. And so, for example, the University of Denver was able to get some of their employees the appreciation, and that came from one of our local caterers. Taste the Love Catering was able to sell 200 pie kits, which, it may not sound like a lot, but to Angela, this was a game changer. She was like, I'm not even going to have to worry about the last 2 weeks of the year, and I'm actually going to take time off to rest and recover, because this created that economic opportunity. And so when we think about oftentimes we think about, the millions of dollars. Our small dollars also have an impact. And so I want to make sure that everyone leaves here thinking of that. Even if it is the $5 transaction, when you choose a local business, you're directly impacting those who are actually working to make it happen, not some CEO's second or third house. And so for community wealth building, the impact on individuals and the impact on our people is very real.
Makisha, what would you add? What stories would you share with us?
Great. So I guess one story I would share is the pandemic story for Sister Biz. Prior to, it's important for me to note that this is prior to the George Floyd incident and the uprising, the new rising of the Black Lives Matter movement that has changed the game so much for the Black community and the country and the globe. So prior to that, there was this small amount of time in about March or April where the pandemic hit and Black businesses were impacted and we were completely invisible. And every day I was getting calls from businesses saying, I don't have the cash flow to even make it through the next week. Like, my revenue today is what will pay my rent next week. And I'm gonna close. I'm not gonna make it through this month. I'm not gonna make it through next month. And I don't have a stash. I don't have reserves. I don't have friends and family capital. And I was getting calls at 5 a.m., text messages every day. And when the federal dollars, the relief dollars started to come through, I was hearing, I'm not able to get to these dollars. I don't know what's going on, but either I don't have a banking relationship, or I don't know how to get to the dollars, or I don't have my paperwork and back office in order to be able to meet the guidelines, or the eligibility requirements screen me out because I'm too small and I don't have employees, whatever the case may be. I only have contractors. All sorts of things were in the way of our women getting to the dollars. And so immediately I began to reach out to the Black Caucus in the state legislature in Colorado. So Leslie Herod and James Coleman, all friends, all people that I've done policy work with in the past. And I was like, I don't know what's going on, but somebody needs to take a look at it. We're completely invisible. We're not going to make it. And that makes me emotional. So we started doing the work to raise money. And within 1 month, we raised somewhere in the neighborhood of like 90K, which is a big deal, because I want to say that at that time, I don't even think Sister Biz's annual revenues were far from that. So we raised that amount of money, and then we distributed it quickly and directly. And we were doing everything, because sometimes, our folks don't have bank accounts, whatever. I was on Cash App, I was Venmoing people, I was dropping checks off at people's homes, everything, to just try to keep the businesses open while we begin to do the inquiries with the state legislature and other stakeholders to see how we could ease up, guidelines, eligibility requirements, find out what the pathway to accessing relief and recovery funds were for our business. And then the George Floyd incident happened, and things began to change. And it was traumatic. It was crazy. It was on top of a pandemic. It was nuts. And we started to see some more responses come through around, funding, access to capital. But the message, the lesson, the thing that was really, really evident for me then is that if we had community wealth building in place where we had our own dollars, our own assets, our own money, we could have helped our own community during that phase, because that's what other communities were doing. And that's what other people do. And that's what families with wealth or any sort of asset or savings or support would do. And when you have such a huge gap there, where there's no friends and family dollars, no reserves, revenue-based businesses that are living from month to month, they're often part-time businesses, or even though they're full-time, they're making part-time revenue. And so it just made the need for community wealth building that more evident. It also was the reason why we launched our back office boot camp, why we have our Black and Bankable program this year, where we're partnering with Vectra and PNC and First Bank to pair up bankers with our women one-on-one to mentor them, pull their paperwork, help them build a plan to become bankable over time. Because we know it's not an overnight thing. And we also want to establish trust between bankers and the women in our programs and banking institutions in our community. And so I'm really excited about that program as well. But yeah, it was a big wake up call for a lot of folks. And just, it wasn't, I knew about this. It's just that we now had a platform for folks to listen, and where folks actually wanted to address the issue. On the positive side, I would say that every day, almost every week, if not every week, I get a text message from someone who lets me know that the fact that we're collective is what makes us strong. Because they get referrals from each other. They work together to land contracts. I had someone tell me that she counted she calculated that she had received over 100K in referrals from Sister Biz in the past year. We had 4 women who crossed the 250K line last year, started under 30K when they started with us. We had 2 women cross the 7-figure line. We had 1 woman purchase a 7-figure property, her first commercial property. These are things that are not just about these women. They're changing the game for our community, for the generations to come. They're starting to think about legacy, and the questions that they ask are starting to make me so proud and so happy that we're making progress. Questions like, now that I have the revenue, how do I, make sure that I turn it into more dollars? How do I make sure that my business is an asset, not just a job? And what does it look like for me to have a family legacy and have, investments? And these are questions you don't have time to ask when you're just trying to put food on the table. And you're just trying to figure out how to get this business off the ground so that it's not stuck in draining the life out of you and the dollars out of you. And so when they start asking certain questions, I start getting really happy because I know that the change is happening, the transformation is happening. If she did it, she's going to tell her how to do it. If she does it, they're going to do it together, and it's going to grow and it's going to accelerate.
I'm glad you brought up that point about revenues, and I'd like to just talk a little bit more about that, because I think a question that we get a lot about community wealth building is it viable? Is it something that just has to be a side hustle, or do people really make a living doing it? Do they have to participate in the kind of more traditional economy? So talk a little bit more about that and what you've seen in that arena.
So I think it's actually, and I think Yessica, I would love for Yessica to speak to this too, because her model is really focused on co-ops and that sort of thing. But I think that we lose out when we don't move in that direction. Like, we are moving in isolated individual paths, and we go slower, and sometimes we don't even make it because we're not bringing our resources together. We're simply too tiny, too small, and too under-resourced to work alone. And so, but I think in terms of models and do they work, I definitely think that for Yessica to speak to, because I think she has powerful information.
Yeah, what do you think, Yessica?
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, there's no alternative if we truly want an economy that works for all. There are full-time jobs. And one of the beautiful things that we're seeing is this collaboration that Makisha talked about. So when the pandemic hit and our caterers all of a sudden had to deal with, how do we pivot? How do we get information? They relied on our network and support of support and each other. And so all of a sudden they were trying to brainstorm ways in which they could cut costs, how they could pivot so they could still provide the meals needed. We were able to connect them to the hospitals that were then providing meals for their frontline workers at the hospitals. We also organized a campaign to be able to provide meals for frontline workers at grocery stores that were often overlooked by the traditional philanthropic channels. And so, but the reality is that these are jobs and this is real. And as Makisha said, oftentimes our entrepreneurs have had to do this out of necessity, and they have built successful businesses for 20 years. Unfortunately, they haven't had the resources to actually move the business off the ground to that next level. And so through a community wealth building lens, we're looking at not only how do we ensure that these businesses provide economic opportunity for the owners, but how do they provide economic opportunities for others? We know that they are the ones who are keeping our community strong, and they're the ones who are providing the culturally relevant and culturally appropriate products and services that our communities need. And so absolutely, it is viable. Employee ownership works. And so with the right resources, I will be lying to you if I say that it's an easy shift. You don't flip the switch and say all of a sudden you're an owner when you've never been trained to do that. And so I want to make sure that the message is, yes, it works. And we've seen it through our pilots, we've seen it through the models, and we've seen it through the data, but it has to have resources attached to it, because our communities have not necessarily had oftentimes I talk about the golf course that often the CEOs of large corporations of entrepreneurs have. They have their golf course where they can go and they tap into that social capital. If they could go to the banker friend and make that deal before they even go to the bank. Our entrepreneurs don't have that, or nor do they have the time, as Makisha said, to go to the golf course to be able to build those. And so in essence, what organizations like Biz and like Center for Community Wealth Building are doing is truly bringing that network of support and social capital to ensure that they can do their best. And yes, it works. And we need to make sure that we're paying attention to that, because the reality is that the current system is very extractive, and it continues to be at the expense of our people, the expense of our workers.
So talk to us for just a second about the role that philanthropy can play in supporting and furthering the kind of work that you do.
Yeah, there's so much. How much time do we have? The one thing that I want to make sure that it's clear is that our current economic system, the policies that have gotten us here are very extractive. And so I challenge philanthropy to think about what policy changes can happen to make sure that our tax dollars are not subsidizing the profits of large corporations when our community-owned businesses don't necessarily have that same benefit. There was a recent report, I believe it was Policy Link, that showed that there was so much subsidy from taxpayers. And so when we go to municipalities and we say, why don't we look at a local business? The first thing that they say is it's more expensive and this is not, we need to be good stewards to our tax dollars. We need to look at how we start to think about the total cost of doing business and how much is costing that low bid when we have to rely on safety net systems like SNAP benefits, perhaps even Medicaid or housing subsidies. Because at the end of the day, we as taxpayers are paying for it. And so why not ensure that those dollars circulate in our community locally? Obviously, I share shopbypac.com. I want everybody who's here right now to go and sign up to get updates. I want you all to be the promoters. This is not a community wealth building thing. This is a community thing. And so if you know of any businesses owned by people of color, sign them up. Our institutions are ready to engage. If you have a place of faith, a congregation, connect them to us. We have organizations, our organization is working with these entities to help them identify where they're currently spending money, where the local capacity is, and where those two can meet. That is really important. Obviously, I want to challenge you all to look at your dollars and where you're currently spending those, because that matters, as I mentioned before. Even if it is a $5 transaction, going to the local business is going to have a significant impact as opposed to going to the big stores. And obviously, support local businesses. At any point that you can, please make sure you support local businesses. And then, of course, it goes without saying, organizations like SistaBiz, Center for Community Wealth Building, and others in our community need the support, the financial support to continue to do the work that we do. There has been times, and I know this from personal experience, where some of us are doing this because we're very passionate about it, and we have done it a lot with a shoestring. And we're very resourceful, we're very resilient, but we're trying to change an entire economic system that is going to require a lot of resources. So, and lastly, I have to say, if you're a business owner, consider conversion to employee ownership to ensure that your legacy lives on and that the people who are working for you can actually benefit from that legacy. So consider employee ownership. If you have any questions, definitely reach out. There's a million and one ways to get involved. So highly encourage you all to stay connected.
Makisha, what would you add?
Sure. I want to piggyback a little bit on what Yessica just said around philanthropists challenging the way that they think about what they fund, but from the standpoint of being willing to take risks that maybe you hadn't taken before on funding stakeholders that maybe you haven't funded before. There are a lot of amazing ideas out in the communities where the problems exist, waiting for the resources to be behind them to implement those ideas. I am super proud in SistaBiz that, so I'm just going to throw it out there, the governor's makeup artist is a SistaBiz member. The mayor buys products from SistaBiz folks. Many of the foundations have hired SistaBiz members to be their virtual assistants, their project managers. We have accountants, we have bookkeepers, we have virtual assistants, we have a ton of different business service providers, marketing professionals, social media managers. Techstars is one of the co-founders hired a SistaBiz social media consultant to be his brand manager. And so we refer out our members to the larger community all the time. So when you're looking for service providers, call us and let us refer our members to you, our women in our programs to you. And then in terms of pro bono work, if there are attorneys out there, our women are constantly looking for just office hours. Just pop in once a month and give us an hour where our women get to ask questions about IP if you're an attorney, about cash flow if you're an accountant. So about IT, if you have IT resources. So we have a pay it forward program where we can either set you up to do individual 20-minute consultations, as many as you'd like, or as little as you'd like, or you can pop in and do group office hours with our women. As Yessica said, buy from businesses of color, buy from Black businesses. And if you need help figuring out how to do that, definitely reach out. I would also just say that I feel as though you should keep going. And what I mean by that is, since the George Floyd incident, a lot of foundations have reached out to me and funded me before, when they hadn't before. But not just funded me, also brought me to the table to have conversations about systems and policy change, and have actually moved on that change, have made application processes easier, have eased up on eligibility requirements so that they're more culturally responsive and that sort of thing. And so keep going with the work that is going right now. It's unprecedented. And keep us at the table to be able to inform that work and participate in that work and partner on that work.
Great. Let's take a few of our audience questions. The first question that I have here asks about unions and where unionization efforts fit in community wealth, whether it's a substitute or complement to employee ownership. How do you think about that?
I can take a stab at it. So yeah, we recently had a conversation with one of the local unions, because to be honest with you, it has been, especially employee ownership, has been a little bit scary. And so we are showing that there's New Era Windows in Chicago is a unionized cooperative. And so I was actually really puzzled when I learned about them. And so when I met with the employees who are the owners, I asked why union, and they were like, why not? That we are oftentimes, when this happens, we tend to not be good to ourselves. And so they said, plus the union provided the platform to be able to get healthcare benefits, to be able to get the support that they needed. And so we are looking at ways in which these two can come together to ensure that the businesses can have the support that they need, and that the employees are taken care of, to ensure that there is a healthier community overall.
We haven't talked very explicitly about people who are undocumented and where they fit into this method. Can either of you speak to that and kind of where that fits in your work?
Absolutely. That's also another really exciting aspect of entrepreneurship in general, in that in the United States, it is currently illegal to hire somebody who does not have the proper documentation. However, any person in the US can be a business owner. And so for undocumented populations, business ownership has actually been the way to earn a living legally in this country. We are also exploring ways in which cooperatives can also be a vehicle for that. And so if you want any more specifics, please be sure to reach out. We have worked with individuals who are interested in learning more, and can definitely share more specific information on that.
Also, Papa Dia is a resource if you are looking at African immigrants and that lens as well on this topic.
Yeah. Thank you. Makisha, you mentioned culturally responsive philanthropy a few minutes ago. Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Mm-hmm. So when I think about culturally responsive, I think about a ton of things, and we could do a whole webinar on it, and people do. They write entire books and courses and the whole thing, but I'll hit it high level by saying, I think it's about, first and foremost, recognizing that when you build a system, that it is in America, it's more than likely to be built in without people of color in mind, without their cultures in mind. And so when you're culturally responsive, you first acknowledge that you're dealing with probably a system rooted in colonization and white privilege. And so therefore it locks out a lot of people of color. And if you want to change that, being culturally responsive is about acknowledging that, and then doing the homework to recognize what's different about that culture and that reality and that experience of those people, that holds them back from being able to access the resources that you're offering others. And then designing systems to increase access, designing systems to increase availability, because just because your doors are open doesn't mean that your resources are truly accessible to me. And so really taking the time to think about what you do on your end to deliver in messaging, in programming, in policies, in systemic, in HR, where are the breakdowns that create barriers to access for communities of color. That's what culturally responsive looks like. And remembering that often culture is about language, right? Culture is about language and the way we do things. And so when you switch cultures, there's a different language, there's a different way we do things. And when you root an entire system of access to resources on the way you do things and the way you speak in your language, you're going to obviously lock out those who don't speak that language and who aren't allowed in those rooms and who aren't. And then their whole social capital system is rooted in fitting in and being a part of that culture. And so you're ultimately locked out financially and socially. And so just really thinking about that, how you reverse that through your programming, through your policies, through your systems, through your hiring, through your messaging, through your training, and those sorts of things.
Thank you. Could either of you speak to some examples of other cities or states, places where community wealth building has worked really well, and what were the factors that contributed to that success?
Oh my goodness, where to begin? So I will add a link to the chat on a report that we recently completed on employee ownership and cooperatives. And it has information on cities like New York, where they have been able to allocate from their municipal general funds millions of dollars to develop worker-owned cooperatives, specifically focusing on communities that haven't traditionally had access to the resources. So New York is definitely one big one. Berkeley, Oakland area, we're seeing a lot of, while there hasn't necessarily been a lot of policy changes, the grassroots efforts and the ecosystem have created some pretty amazing models that we're now looking at potentially bringing here. So when we're thinking about involuntary displacement from gentrification, we're looking at what would it look like to have community-owned real estate with a way for philanthropy, for more established funding entities to be able to come and support that. One of the really exciting ones is Boston Ujima project, where they come together as a collective, and people are investing, people are making decisions to make sure that they are making the best decisions for the communities. Anybody can invest, but it's only those who are most impacted that have a voice in the process. And then we have very large models like the Evergreen Cooperatives, where they've been able to look at the anchor institution model, where the Cleveland Clinic has been able to support the local cooperative and help them form the local cooperative to meet the need of the anchors. And the reality is that when we are looking at these larger contracts, these institutions have a really significant voice and power to make changes for our economic realities in our communities. So I will share the link to that report, and happy to, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We're always happy to talk about worker ownership and entrepreneurship.
We've talked a little bit about this, but there's some curiosity from the audience to, I think, go maybe a level deeper about how your businesses are overcoming the good old boys club mentality of companies who are hiring people they know through traditional methods, like you're mentioning the golf course or chambers of commerce or those kinds of things. So could you maybe expand upon that a little, both Makisha and Yessica?
We talk about this all the time in Sister Biz. First of all, we have a saying that we're going to make sure that through this work, we create our own good old girls club. And really what that means for us is how can we empower our women to be to a place where they build wealth for themselves and their families and the generations to come, such that they are able to resource each other and refer business to each other and network each other and expand their networks so that they can share networks, larger networks. And so that's something that we look at. We also look at, like, the Black and Bankable initiative is an example in my mind of really looking at social capital and changing those networks by pairing up women with bankers. So we had really great meetings with PNC and Vectra and First Bank in the past few weeks. And one of the things that came up was, each woman is going to meet with a banker on a monthly basis for the first few months. And in the first meeting, the first half of the meeting, you cannot talk about business. You have to learn more about each other and build relationships. We always talk about the importance of trust building in this work, talk about the importance of relationship building, and we're making it tangible by saying, don't even talk business. First, let's just let's shut down, let's disintegrate this cultural, this cross-cultural barrier that might exist between a Black woman and a banker, and start to get to know each other and build relationships so that we can learn about each other's culture. And so the Black and Banker initiative isn't just about accessing a loan. It's about becoming bankable. It's about learning the language of money. It's about learning the language of banking institutions and learning more about the financial system and how I'm locked out of it and what I need to do to not be locked out of it. And on the way, meeting people, meeting bankers, meeting professionals, being invited to events, connecting. Like, we literally had the conversation about these very tangible things we want bankers to do with the women that they're working with, so that they increase their social capital, they increase their professional network, so that they can access the resources they need and be at the tables that we're just traditionally not invited to, that we don't even know about sometimes, and that we don't know how to access or really be in, even when we're physically there. We're not, really invited to the opportunities that might exist in the behind the scenes conversations. So I think that is the when it comes to social capital, it's about building mainstream partnerships with mainstream institutions where we challenge them to invite us to the table, to learn more about how to make their spaces inclusive, how to make their spaces a place where we're not visitors, but this is our home as well, and how to make that change about trust and relationship building and about tangible results in access to resources.
Perfect. I think we're going to leave that answer there because I want to ask this one final question in our last few minutes before we turn it back over to Javier. And this audience member says, this sounds like meaningful and challenging work. What keeps you going? So just take 1 minute and tell us what inspires you, what keeps you going.
It is very difficult, and yet the possibility of being able to change the economic paradigm for our communities is what keeps me going. It is Irma's story, it is Angela's story, it is the story of the many workers who are working so hard to keep our economy going and are the ones who are not benefiting from it. And so every morning I'm like, why do I do this? Oh, that's right. It's because this matters, because people are in essence creating opportunities for themselves. And all we're doing is creating that bridge to ensure that that happens.
Thank you, Yessica. How about you, Makisha? What keeps you going?
Text messages. I mean, really, truly, it's when the text message that comes in that, and I'm affectionately called Coach in the Black community and the sister-based community. And so when I see a text message that says, Coach, I got certified, Coach, I landed that contract. And it's like the excitement that they made the next step, the hope that is in their tone and in their voice. So when I see them in person and they tell me, I met my revenue goal. Like, can you believe it? I met my revenue goal, and my revenue goal is actually a goal where I could actually take care of my family. Like, I could leave my 9 to 5, and they're so shocked because a lot of times when they come in the door and they start coaching, they don't believe that that is possible. And so, yeah, when I get those text messages where they now believe, they now see it, they're doing it, they're making it happen, and they're telling someone else that they can do it too. That's every day. I look forward to that. That's what wakes me up.
Love it. I love it. Well, thank you to both of you. This has been a great conversation. I'm going to turn it back over to our CEO, Javier.
What a great way to close out the session. My deep thanks to Yessica and to you, Coach, for an outstanding discussion today. And to all of our guests, thank you again for joining us. All guests will be receiving an email with some ways to engage. We've talked about some of those throughout the course of the last hour. So we'll compile all of those for you. So be on the lookout for that, and be on the lookout for additional discussions like this one throughout the year on different topics of interest to all of us here at the Foundation. So again, thanks very much. Have a great rest of the day.